Wow, I don't know if there is a topic that runs deeper inside of me than the curiosity of being a father to daughters. Um, I have three boys and two girls, and fathering daughters is like if there is a zip code that's right next to heaven, like that's the pocket for me. I adore my daughters. So when I talk to young dads, there's always that question about parenting girls. Um, you gals confuse us, you know that. Uh, that's been true of all time. And so that's a pretty frequent question. And the first thing that I say is when parenting daughters, dad, remain curious. Remain curious. And in order to remain questions, the second thing that you got to do, you got to ask great questions. Get into that habit when they're teeny little girls. Get into the habit of asking them questions about what their interests actually are. Questions about what it is about that friend that they just love so much. What it was about that movie that scared them or delighted them. Ask your daughters 1,000 questions. And this is hard. I mean, listen, I have lived in this space for decades now. It's hard to ask questions and to stay deeply in the moment. That's hard. I get that. And it's a discipline, but you can do that. You could do that. They're worth it. You can do that. So remain curious, ask great questions. And here's a technique that I used 1,000 times, and partly for my own purposes, but partly for my daughters, which is when you get to the end of a conversation, lean forward and use these three magical words. Tell me more. That sort of deep appreciation, respect, that deep desire for insight is remarkable, it's unique, and it's valued. And so a lot of times when I'm coaching young dads on this point, I tell them the way that I contextualize my relationship with my daughters, which is I would say to myself phrases like hand-selected words. Roger, these girls of yours are precious and they're valuable and they're worth the agonizing effort of being selected. And so hand selecting words for my daughters, it's a phrase that for my internals helped me to be valuing them in the present moment. And isn't that so important in the father-child relationship? So hand-selected words. What are the hand-selected words that you will choose for your daughters? Get into this discipline at a very young age. Take them out. Daddy-daughter dates are wonderful. And let them decide where you're going and what you're eating and what movie you're seeing. Here's one that's a challenge. Man, treat their mother with hallowed respect. And when you do that for a couple of decades, you have literally created a framework for them, a frame through which they can view their own relationships with men in their lives. And if you'll do that time and time again, which is always a discipline, but so worth it, you'll be creating this framework where in the future they've got something worth emulating. They've got this template that is customary in their lives. The last couple of things. There's a quote from a book that I want to share with you before we get off this topic, but be really intentional with your words. And not just spoken. Here's a great, I don't know if it's a tip or a trick or a technique, but man, I love this. I write letters to my daughters and I put a stamp on them and I send them through the mail, and then through the mail system they eventually end up back at my home. This was when they're younger, obviously. It's curious to get a letter at your home from your father. And you can figure out little tips and tricks and techniques like that so that you're leaning forward, doing something that is unique and distinct, that is noticeable, that takes your daughter out of her standard everyday life and creates a moment. Like, isn't that what the first 20 years of parenting is? Like, creating moments that are memorable. I love the frame of this story because it gets larger, which is with my eldest daughter. Eventually she left. She traveled internationally for quite a number of years, landed in Minneapolis, so her home is 750 miles from me. And she took this upon herself, and what a lovely gesture. After having had this relationship with her father now for over 2 decades, she went out and bought a journal. She wrote several pages, handwritten to her father. And she put that in the mail and sent it to me. And she and I created this entirely new family tradition. She would write to me. I'd look forward to getting that in the mail. I would write to her. She would look forward to getting in the mail. So figure out how to put your special thumbprint on the relationship with your daughters. Last point, and then, like I said, a great quote from a book. When your daughter is in her teen years, attend to your psyche. Be intimately aware of what's happening on your internals. You'll find some demons there. You'll find fewer angels there. But something about attending to that, guys, is it builds a texture in your soul where you're leaning into that, where you're curious about it, where you're aware of it. And if you'll do that when your daughter or daughters, in my case, are in their teen years, you can actually get to a place where you can cooperate with those internal voices, with the persona, with your psyche, with your subconscious. It's a series of daily disciplines. And I would just end with this caution. If you don't, the likelihood that you get through those 6 or so tumultuous teen years unscathed with your daughter is unlikely. Just because there's so many opportunities for hurt, both for you and for her. So I was saying earlier about this quote. So I think it was a session that we did recently. We talked about the book The Alchemist. And there's a phrase in there towards the end that I think is, maybe it's just me, but as a father, this is how I think about my relationship with my daughters. Because it's not linear, it's vast and encompassing. So towards the end of the book, Santiago is running the risk of death at the hands of a desert warlord. And the only way that he is not going to be struck dead the next day is if he can control the wind today. So they more or less put on a show, and Santiago can't control the wind. Kind of like you with your daughters. And he does this curious thing. And it's a lot like how I resonate with my girls. The book says, Santiago, not knowing what else to do. Listen to those words. Not knowing what else he could possibly do. He opens his mouth and here's what he says. He talks to the wind. And he says, just, I love this. As a father, I love this. Santiago says, talking to the wind, just teach me to be the wind for a few moments so you and I can talk about the limitless possibilities of people and the wind. And this was so beautifully stated. The author ends with this phrase, and the wind's curiosity was aroused. You'll never capture your girls. You'll never harness them. They're kind of like the wind. Maybe the best that I did in those 20 years that they were in my home is arouse curiosity. And if I did that, I will be gathering from that investment for 5 or 6 decades. Be very selective. In how you attend to your girls.